So I'm trying to read 24 banned or challenged books in 2024, and the first book I have read on that challenge is Beloved by Toni Morrison. Now this is a book set in the 1800s in America, mainly in Ohio, Cincinnati, and it's about a mother, Setha, and her daughter, Denver, and they live in house 124. And we follow these main characters, and Setha's a slave or former slave, and it's really about the trauma of slavery, the brutality of it, and also the impact, the lasting impact of it, not only for the individuals who suffered it, but future generations and a community as a whole as well. And we follow mainly Setha through sort of flashbacks and going back to her escape from slavery, her former time in slavery, and their life out of slavery. And we also look at her mother-in-law, who also lived previously with her at 124 before she passed away. Baby Suggs is her mother-in-law's known as. And also there's a fellow character who comes towards the beginning of the story called Paul D, who used to be a slave in the same place as Setha, and then they form a relationship. And it's all of these characters, and you get the backstory of all these characters, and it's told in such a way that initially, I'll admit, I found it difficult to get into the rhythm of Toni Morrison's writing, and it took me a while to get to grips with her storytelling, because it's not a linear story. It is mixed, as I say, backwards and forwards in time. But once I got into the flow of it and the rhythm of it, and it is just magnificent, but also horrific and brutal and just emotionally painful to read. And it is that because of the subject it is dealing with, which is slavery and the outcomes of slavery. Now, what was most shocking to me, as I found out afterwards, is this is based on a true story of a woman called Margaret Garner, who, like Setha, escaped from slavery, and there are similar events within their lives that Toni Morrison uses as some of the key focal points of this story. And it is truly horrendous and not an easy read for anyone. It is probably one of the most difficult, shocking reads I've ever read. I think it must be. I can't think of anything else that sort of stands on that sort of pedestal of how difficult a read this was. Now, just because a book is difficult to read doesn't mean it's not worth reading. And this, for me, this was exceptionally worth reading, and it forces one to view what slavery really was, and I'll go back to the word again, the brutality of it, of treating other human beings as not only less than human, but as purely as property, and as less than animals. It's hardly believable that this was so near in our past. So why is this book banned? And there's three main reasons why this book is banned. The first is offensive language. And is there offensive language in this book? Yes, absolutely. There is plenty of offensive language in this book. And again, let's put this in context, and this is historical fiction, but let's put in context that it's based on 1800s US, mainly in Ohio, let's say Cincinnati, but we do move around a little bit. And this is language that would have been used, especially by slave-owning whites, to the enslaved black people. So it is accurate and reflective of the language that was used. It's shocking language to be used, and unfortunately it is even more shockingly some of this language is still used today, especially some of the racial slurs which are used in this book. But to me, that's not a reason to ban this book from schools and education. In fact, it's a reason to employ it in schools and lessons to understand why this language is offensive, and its roots and its impact, and the importance of challenging this language and behaviour when it's seen. The second point, main point for banning, is violence. And again, yes, there is some truly horrific and brutal violence in this book. But again, we're talking about slavery, we're discussing slavery, and we can try and give this impression that it was all fine and dandy and everyone was happy and it was the way of the world. But it wasn't. It was brutal, it was horrific, and people were not treated as people and were brutally attacked and regularly tortured. And some of the descriptions of the tortures that were inflicted on people are devastating, and it is difficult to read. But again, I would argue that this is not a reason to ban a book. It is not glorifying this violence by any stretch of the imagination. It's not encouraging this violence in any way of stretch of the imagination. It is a hard, clear-eyed look at what was actually happening. And I think to have this discussion in a school environment where it can be discussed and examined is important to understand history, our history, the history of a lot of the Western world is important, and understanding the traumatic impact of that history is also important. And the third one is around sex. So there is sex in this book. There's also violent sexual abuse in this book. Again, on the violent side, go back to the previous point I made, on the pure sex side, people have sex. This argument that it goes harks to sort of the banning of sexual education in schools as well. To me, it makes much more sense for people to be informed and make informed decisions about their lives and their choices than to be uninformed and have that ignorance taken advantage of potentially at some point in their lives. I think the more informed people are, the better decisions they generally make. It's not foolproof by any stretch of imagination, but the more informed you are, generally the better decisions you make. So I think on those 3 points, I don't think those 3 points or the main 3 points for banning this book are valid. I think this is a very hard read, a very difficult read. I think it's a book that should be discussed. It's a book that is important to have in schools. I think it gives a harrowing but clear-eyed view of what the experience of slavery was like, and the impact and trauma of that on individuals, families, communities as a whole. And I think that is a valuable lesson to experience and learn. And I think that is best done in a school environment. Now, is this a book I'm going to reread over and over again? I probably will come back to it, I think. I think it's not a book that I'm desperate to read again, if that makes sense, because it was very hard, emotionally harrowing and difficult read. But I think there's a lot in that book that I didn't get on the first read. I think there's a lot of points that Toni Morrison is raising and discussing that probably passed me by, and I want to understand them more. But she's discussing sort of family, mother and daughter relationships, how does one raise a child when in slavery mother and child were generally separated incredibly early, and never formed any form of relationship. So how does then a mother who never had a relationship never allowed to have a relationship with her parents then form a bond with her children, and what does that bond look like? And then the wider community and the impact on wider community and the supportive side of that, of the pulling together and the benefit of community, but also that there are negative sides of that when that community is split or falls apart, the devastating impact that can have on an individual. There's so much. There's what it means to be a man in society, as well, and in community, and in that environment where you're not treated as even human, what it means to be a man. There's so many points in this book, and this is a book that is you could study it for many a year probably and continue to pick things out of it. It's an exceptional read. It's an incredibly difficult read. I say probably the most difficult read I've ever had or ever done. And I still think, even with those difficult, harrowing things it's dealing with, it probably makes it even more important for it to be taught in schools. So that's where I'm going to finish this review. If you haven't read Toni Morrison's Beloved, I would recommend it. Go into it with open eyes, because it is going to be a very difficult, hard, emotional read. But if you have read it, please do let me know your thoughts in the comments, and your thoughts around why it's such a challenged and banned book. I'll be very interested in hearing your viewpoints and starting that discussion in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.